Hello and welcome to another video, everybody. In today's video I'm going to be redoing this really neat little mid-century table. It has 4 leaves and the top flips open and the whole thing extends and goes basically from the size of a hall table to an over 6-foot dining table or games table. It also comes with this extra set of legs for support underneath the bottom. Let's get into this. My name is Angie and I refinish furniture. Sometimes I paint and sometimes I don't, but I always do what I can to save old pieces from the trash. Welcome to my workroom. Okay everybody, having a good look here. Clearly the finish that is existing is extremely worn. There are a lot of scratches and dings and areas where the finish is just failing entirely. Step 1 in this rescue is going to be obviously taking it apart, separating all the pieces. We're going to strip off the old finish, sand it down, stain it, and apply a lacquer finish and wax. Now, I have seen a lot of hinges over the last few years. I've never seen anything quite like this. This is the neatest thing. This top piece is the only part that is finished on both sides with this mahogany veneer, and obviously that's because when it is closed, one side is exposed, and when you open up the top, the other side is exposed. Now these legs are numbered, which is not uncommon, but they're numbered in marker, and there are a few other things that are kind of making me feel like maybe this piece has been refinished before. This middle bracket is where that middle leg section goes. To make it easier to strip, sand, and stain these, I'm going to be removing each piece individually. I could refinish this with the table actually together, but it just makes it a lot harder, especially for getting those edges that butt up against each other. There's 4 sets of these little cardboard spacers, and I'm just going to mark them so that I know exactly where each one came from when it comes time to put it back together. And here's a better look at the construction of this piece. As mentioned, there's a veneer on the bottom, a mahogany veneer on the top of the table, and then there's some other solid wood in between. I'm going to be stripping the entire piece with the Circa 1850 stripper. It's one of my favorite ones to use. I often get asked for a link for this, and the only reason I don't is because it's not available everywhere. I'm pretty sure that you can't get it in the US and you can't get it in the UK, but it's, at the moment anyway, still available in Canada. You definitely want to be using a respirator and be in a room with a lot of ventilation when using this. Now, this project actually took me 3 entire days to do, and of course through the magic of YouTube it seems like it took me about 15 minutes. But it's a lot of time to strip, sand, and then stain, wait for the stain to dry, apply the lacquer, wait for the lacquer to dry, and that's multiple coats, and yeah, 3 full days to do this. I'm using a 3M stripping pad here to try to get some of the residual mess off. Sometimes you can just use it on its own, sometimes I add a little bit of extra stripper just for some extra power, but it really does a good job. I'm going to be power sanding everything except for these legs here, the middle section. I'm going to be hand sanding that. So all of the finish is gone, but there's still a little bit of color left, so I'm using a 120 grit sand pad to get through that, and then I'm going to finish it off with a 220 grit. One of the legs has a fairly sizable gouge here. I'm not really sure what happened, but I'm going to be using some wood epoxy to fill it. So basically you just cut off a very small amount. Once you cut this and mix it, you have to use it, you can't reuse it. So you just mix them together until the color becomes one uniform color, and then you apply it where you need to put it. You want to apply it just a little bit proud of the surface so that you can sand it smooth once it's dry and hardened. But you don't want it sticking out too much because it is quite difficult to sand. So once I have it in, I'm just going to smooth it out with my finger and just leave it slightly above the level of the leg. And while that's setting up, I'm going to get to work on the rest of the leaves. Remember how I said I had some suspicions that this table had been refinished before? This is one example. So this is what it looks like when you sand through the veneer, except this isn't me. I didn't sand through here, and you can tell because it still has that dark color down in that groove. And also, I don't know what this is, but it looks like someone tried to scratch out or sand out some sort of stain. So that coupled with the veneer burn through, I really do feel like this table, this isn't its first time being refinished. This is a great shot of the different colors of the woods used. So the mahogany is obviously the one on top, and then there's some other sort of wood in between which gives it that lighter tone. But the stain I'm going to use is going to make it all uniform. This is that 220 grit sand pad. You can see that most of those dark, weird stains have come out. I can't really go over it too many more times because I don't want to go through that veneer. Unfortunately, I was having some issues with my SD card, so I didn't get to show it, but these little caps on the end were quite tarnished, and a couple were to the point where I wouldn't have been able to polish them out, so I ended up giving them a light coat of metallic spray paint. I'm choosing to use this water-based wood stain by Saman in the color American Walnut. As mentioned in another video, I didn't love this product at first, but once I realized you could water it down slightly, which is what I'm doing here, I actually have learned to love it. And it's really good, especially for taking two woods that aren't the same tone and making them look the same. So for this, it's going to be great. One thing I do love about this stain is that it doesn't leave lap marks. So if you have to go back over and brush up against a part you already did, as soon as you go over that part, it reactivates and you don't get those hard lines. But on the flip side of that, it does dry faster than an oil stain, so you have to move along. You have to really move fairly quickly. But just like an oil stain, you wipe on and wipe off. This particular brand of water-based stain tends to look very dull and chalky once it's dry but not sealed. Don't panic if you're using it for the first time and you're thinking, oh my gosh, this finish is terrible. As soon as you put your top coat on, it's going to come to life, and you're going to see that here in about 3, 2, 1. I let the stained pieces sit for about 6 hours, which is plenty of time to dry before adding a top coat. If I'd used an oil-based stain, I'd want to wait at least a couple of days before I add any kind of film finish. My preference is usually for the Watco brand lacquer, but unfortunately the entire city is out of it at the moment for some reason. If you're doing any kind of spray finish and you happen to get a little piece of dust or cat hair or something that lands in your finish, don't go in with your fingers and grab it. Just let the first coat sit and then lightly sand and then do your next coat, and it should be fine. This touch-up marker I'm using to darken the wood epoxy looks a little bit dark, but once we hit it with the lacquer, it's going to blend in nicely. One way to finish off a lacquer finish is to add some sort of a wax. I'm going to be wet sanding this to 600 grit, and then I'm using an 800 grit Merkur Merlon pad to apply my wax. There are different ways you can wet sand. Obviously the most common is just with a little bit of water. I'm using a little bit of Odie's oil here, just a very small amount. It just adds that little bit of extra lubricant for the sanding process, and I'm using very light pressure here. I am not pressing down too hard on this because obviously I don't want to sand through my lacquer, I just want to smooth it out. So once the Odie's has been buffed off and left to sit for about 12 hours, I'm going to go in with the Odie's wax, and this little amount here is going to do basically this entire top. You want to use your wax and Odie's oil technically very sparingly. It goes beyond just not wanting to waste product. It will actually hinder you a little bit if you use too much, so use less than you think you need. I'm setting all of the waxed pieces aside to set up for about an hour and a half, and then look at this beautiful finish as I buff off this Odie's wax. This almost looks like a brand new table. It's remarkable, actually. Thank you guys so much for following along on this little table adventure. It's hard to condense 3 days worth of work into about 12 minutes, but I did my best, and let's have a look at this table now.